All right, welcome folks. Just about 7, so let's go ahead and get started with a couple of library announcements first. So my name is Jez. I am the Adult and Teen Programming Coordinator here at the library. So I organize all of the events that you've been coming to. This one is a hybrid event. That means some of you are here in person and some people are watching online. If you're watching via Zoom, we are using the webinar format, which means you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So you can sit back and relax, and those of you in person need to be on your best behavior. If you are here in person, please keep your mask on throughout the program. If you do need to leave the room, just make sure the door closes quietly behind you. It will kind of slam otherwise. And if you need to use the restroom, it's straight down the hall and to the left by where you came in. We have a couple of other programs coming up this week. So tomorrow at 7 p.m., this one is in person only. It's called What Your Library Can Do for You. This is one of my favorite programs to do. I do it once a year. And it's kind of an overview of the super user's guide to a library. All of the things that we do that you did not know we did. And I think now that we're all back in person, there's probably more than usual that you don't realize we do because we've added so much in the last 2 years and changed the way we do things. So one of our other librarians, Alyssa, and I will be presenting, and then we have a behind the scenes tour. So if you want to see all of the areas you're not usually allowed in, you can come tomorrow night. And then Thursday night at 7 p.m. is our new French discussion group. So if you've come to Ciao Italia before, it's similar to that. But if you know some of the French language or you want to learn the French language, this is your chance to do that. It is only on Zoom right now, but you can sign up for that online. All of these you can sign up for at elmlib.org/events. And tonight we have a book release party. So we were lucky enough to get Cathy on the day her book was released. So I'm going to turn it over to her and we'll learn about the Zen Parenting book. Welcome.
Thank you, Jess. Hello, hello, hello. Is that on? Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. So thank you to those of you who came out tonight, and thank you to those of you who are watching virtually. I was just thinking about how I haven't done a live presentation in a couple of years because of COVID, of course. And so I have been teaching in a mask, but I have never done a presentation in a mask. And it's going to be interesting because I have a microphone, I'm going to change slides, and I have glasses that steam up when I put them on. So bear with me. I'm going to kind of learn this as I go, but I'm just really happy to be here. And I feel very honored to be able to talk about this book and share it with you and answer any questions you have. So my hope is that, it's kind of, the night is structured in such a way where I'm going to speak and then there's time for Q&A, but you don't have to hold questions. If there's something that I'm talking about that you're like, you have a personal experience or you want me to elaborate or I didn't go very far, just stop me. It's kind of got a nice group here. So feel free to do that because I'm sure if you have the question, I say this to my students all the time, somebody else has the question too. So you're not alone. So I guess I'll just start by talking about the development of this book, not the boring part, but why I decided to structure it the way that I did. I was just telling some ladies before we started that I actually started writing this book about 4 years ago. It was when my daughter was a freshman in high school and she's now in college. And I remember thinking it would be like, a 2-year process, or, I kind of felt like I could kind of go through all the pieces of it kind of easily streamlined. And it was actually much different than that. Going into a traditional publishing kind of situation, there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of change this, shift that. And basically the input I was given, because any of you who have read things that I've written before, I tend to write more an essay. Like I'll write a story about something and I will try to share, a lesson within the story. The feedback I got is great, love your stories, but can you write something more in a narrative way where you can piece all of these ideas together and put it together in one book, which I wasn't sure I could do. It was a challenge that I wanted to take on. what I had to figure out was, how am I going to talk about everything that a parent needs to understand, or at least look at, and not make it feel overwhelming, right? Because if you really think about, like, Todd and I have been doing Zen Parenting Radio for about 11 years. We have 600 and something, 50 something podcasts. We've talked about a million different things, how it relates to parenting, how it relates to our own self-awareness, plus just being an educator and being a therapist for the last 25 years. How am I going to put all this into one book? And so my thought was chakras. So, and it's actually pronounced chakras, even though when we say it, sometimes we hear S, but it's pronounced chakras. And I was excited to do this because I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a yogi. I think in a more spiritual way. I think about mind and body. I think about all these parts of ourselves and how it comes together. But I didn't want it to feel esoteric. I didn't want it to feel like something that was only spiritual in nature. I really wanted it just to be a structure of how to look at a lot of different concepts, but have it feel like we could put all the pieces together, and that we could work on things, or, we could focus on things kind of one stage at a time, knowing that if we needed to, we could go back up and down. There is, even though this is linear in nature and it is a structure that builds, it isn't linear where all of a sudden you're working on a right to know, which is your 7th chakra, top of your head, and you're done. Doesn't work that way. You may end up having an experience that drives you into more of your heart center, maybe heartbreak, or new love, or a new baby, or we were just talking about our children going off to college, where you have to go back into your heart center. Or, COVID, which we all experienced, was a foundation shaker, which is our, a right to be, like our sense of belonging, our sense of foundation, our sense of feeling grounded to the earth. Something that COVID definitely did to us was unmoor us. We weren't grounded anymore. We didn't know what came next. We didn't know what to believe. We didn't know what we were supposed to do. So interesting that what we were told to do is do nothing. Don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. And that's not how we're really hardwired. It was very difficult. So a lot of us are still trying to kind of get our foundation again. So even though we may have been kind of working on other things, we go back down to the very beginning and work on foundation. So what I'm hoping is, for those of you who appreciate the idea of the chakras, which are energy centers within our body that help us align with these principles, if that doesn't resonate with you, you can just look at it as a structure of how to view our own self-awareness, how to look at things in an order that makes sense to you, and how to kind of encapsulate all of these parenting ideas in an organized way. So I love both. Like the feedback I've gotten from fellow yogis, or people who are very into chakras, or people who are very into spirituality, they like this idea. This is fun for them to pull at or to add to their existing knowledge. But for those of you that chakras don't mean anything, that you're like, I kind of understand what they are, but it doesn't really resonate with me. You can just look at it as a scaffolding, a way of building our self-awareness as we go through. Okay. And as I said before, to understand that this is lifelong, that we go back and forth between these, that it's not about that we're a problem to solve, and that once we get up to, our 7th chakra, which is our connection to everything, that we're somehow done. Life is a mixture of experiences where we go up and down, need to work on different things the whole time. Now, what's so important about this is that that's what our children need to understand about life too, okay? Their ability to watch us go through the ups and downs in life is how they normalize their own experiences and their ups and downs. When our children start school, or maybe even before then, if they're like in classes or playgroups, we start them on a very linear path of, here's what's expected of you. here's this grade, then you go to the next grade, and then you go to or if they're like in a club or an organization, you start with this and then you move up to this level, if it be Girl Scouts or dance or soccer. And they tend to learn that they're supposed to get better and better and better at things and like climb this ladder. But for, all of us here as human beings and as parents, we know it doesn't always work that way. We don't always have this experience of like things just continue to go up. Sometimes our kids in 5th grade have a really difficult time and have to relearn a lot of things about friendships or about who they are or about what they want. Or maybe that happens in 8th grade, or maybe that happens senior year, and they end up having to focus again on establishing their foundation. This is what life is about. And the more we can practice and understand the back and forth of life, the more our kids will accept this as being normal, and the more that they will accept their own challenges as being typical and not that they're the only ones. What I can tell you is that, I've worked with teenagers and college kids, and I have 3 children of my own. I have a 17-year-old, an almost 19-year-old, can't believe that, and a 14-year-old. And what I know is that they have gone through a lot of things, and they have had to watch me go through my challenges to understand what they should do next. I say in my book several times, but I say this on the show too, is children don't learn by listening to what we say. They learn by watching how we live, not how we tell them we live. A lot of times we like to tell our stories of here's what I do, or here's what I do if I were you. They're not learning from the lecture. They're learning in watching how you manage things. And not just always the challenges, the joys too. How you treat your friends, how you treat your partner, how you treat, service staff, how you manage traffic. And in no way am I saying you have to do it perfectly or else you've screwed them up. It's not that at all. They need to know that it's normal to get frustrated in traffic and that maybe you can laugh it off sometimes. They need to know that sometimes you get frustrated at your partner and this is how you manage that afterwards. It's helpful if they see you make mistakes and then apologize later, because then they know if they make mistakes, they can apologize later. So this is not this idea that, children learn by watching how we live. It doesn't mean that we need to be walking on eggshells and be worried that we're going to demonstrate something that we don't want them to see. Because even if we're having great difficulty, they learn by watching how we navigate that. If we have a good cry and, as long as they don't feel like they need to take care of us, that's not their job, but it's okay. Because then they're like, oh, crying's a thing that we do. It's something we can do in this family. Talking about feelings, talking about anger. These are things we can do. So this, development of self in this book is really, it's like the best kept secret, or it's not a secret at all. It's really about you. Like Zen Parenting, this book, and Zen Parenting Radio, the show that Todd and I do, is of course about parenting in a roundabout way, but really it's about you and about how you take care of yourself, how you practice self-compassion, how you have a sense of your own belonging, how you deal with your own emotions and your ability to even have the emotions. It's okay to get angry and to be sad and to feel frustrated or lonely or whatever these things are. It's how you accept yourself that teaches our children how they can accept themselves. Okay. That's really the core of everything. And so as we're going through, in the book, as we go through all of these stages, it's about you, but at the end of each chapter, I actually give like good ideas of how you can intertwine this with your communication and your connection to your kids. I talk about, okay, so we're talking about belonging. This is what you want to talk to your kids about. Do they feel like, just one question right off the bat, asking your kids, when you come home from school, do you feel calmer at home? Do you feel, when you come home, do you feel safe? I mean, it's quite a question, right? But what if your kid is like, no, I actually don't? That's a worthy discussion. Doesn't mean you don't have to be shaming. You don't have to be, oh, I've done a horrible job. It's just asking them why. Tell me why. Could be as simple as they say, well, when I come home, I feel like everybody inundates me with questions about how's my day. I feel like I have to say fine. I feel like I have to appease you. They won't use that word. I feel like I just want to be alone and everybody is on me, or vice versa. I feel like I come home and there's nobody here to talk to and nobody's asking me. It's different. And just the question can create a really interesting conversation. Where in the house do you feel comfortable? Where do you go to get cozy? And they may tell you, or they may say nowhere. I don't know where to go. That's an interesting conversation. And all of this has to do with that first chakra, that sense of belonging, that sense of internal safety. Because in that chapter, I talk a lot about how, as a society, we are very interested in physical safety. And this is wonderful. This is not a problem. We're very interested in helmets. We're very interested in car seats. Obviously, very interested in masks. We're very interested in keeping our physicality safe. But we are not as focused on emotional safety. We are not as focused on how our children feel internally. And this is not surprising for those of us who are from Gen X or older. Typically, not for everybody, but most people came from a family that we didn't talk about those things. It was kind of like, just buck up and go and keep going and just keep doing it. And I did it and you do it too. But things are changing. That's not the way things are anymore. We're supposed to, in every generation, evolve and take what we've learned from previous generations and hopefully hold on to some of it, the traditions, the culture, the things that we appreciated that really helped the connection. But there may be some things we need to do away with, ways that we were parented that we don't want to pass on anymore. And one of them that I would say, as a clinician and as somebody who's been working with people for a long time around this, is we want to open up these conversations about emotional well-being. And not just because I think it's a good idea, but because anxiety and depression for our kids is through the roof. And it's not because we just talk about anxiety and depression. A lot of parents will say to me, and a lot of my college students too, well, the reason people say they're anxious is because we talk about anxiety all the time. I mean, I guess there's a percentage that could be true, but that's not really what's happening. Kids are feeling so much pressure from a very early age. They are feeling things moving really fast. They are feeling, ironically, disconnected, even though we have a much more connected, virtual kind of world. They're feeling more disconnected. They're feeling like they can't keep up. There's a lot of pressure. So now, with that said, that doesn't need to scare us, because if we have conversations with our kids about these things, if in our own homes, we talk about decreasing this pressure, meaning letting them know that obviously we want them to do what they can and use their skill sets, but that we're not going to love them any less. We are not going to treat them any differently if they have struggles or they have different needs, or they don't want to do the exact same sports we did in high school, that we let them know that we want to hear them and engage them in the process of them becoming themselves. We want to be a support system so they can become who they're supposed to be instead of telling them who to be. That's a very different thing. An example I actually used in a class this morning that I taught was about how, like, if you think about a seed, like let's say it's an oak tree seed, okay? When you get that oak tree seed and you hold it in your hand, I don't know what one looks like, by the way, I'm just using this as an example. That seed has all the information in it that it needs to become a tree, right? But it doesn't look like a tree yet. It doesn't know what a tree is supposed to do in winter, spring, summer, fall. It doesn't know any of that yet. It hasn't experienced it, but it has all the DNA in it to become who it is, what it is. And it's the same with our kids. They come here with a certain sense of self. And any of you who have more than one child know this, because I have 3 daughters, all raised in the same home. Todd and I are their parents. They're not that far apart in age, and they are so different. And I'm sure with birth order, there was some difference in how we parented them. We see that now. There's sometimes a difference in the way you parent the first versus the third, but not enough difference to create completely different personality types. So there's something they come in with that needs to be nurtured so they can become the oak that they're supposed to be. instead of us saying, no, I'd rather you be an elm. No, I think I'd rather you become a pine tree. When that's not how they're wired. They are who they are. And the best thing that we can do is water that and nurture that. You've got my analogy. And so to do that, though, to be that kind of supportive parent, we have to trust this in ourselves. We have to trust that we are also who we're supposed to be, that we are living in a way that feels in our integrity, that we are showing up as ourselves. Because if we are, or at least we're practicing it, because obviously all of us become chameleons occasionally, depending on where we are. It's not like we're constantly our true selves. But for the most part, do we feel like we are who we are? Because if we do, then it's a lot easier to let our kids become that too. So as someone who many years ago, I used to work at Lurie Children's Hospital in psychiatric. And I would have kids as my patients, and they would come into our program. It was a partial hospitalization program. And these kids had a lot of challenges, emotional, behavioral challenges. But for the most part, they would come into the program and they would learn so fast, and they would want to meet their goals. And they would want to, be helpful on the floor, and they would want to have the adult support. But then they would go home after a week or two, and then they would come back through our, system, sometimes a month later. And a lot of times that was because things at home hadn't changed, that the same cycle, the same dynamics were happening at home. And so what I realized as a person working with kids is I still wanted to work with kids. I still wanted to work with students, but I also really wanted to work with parents. I really wanted to support parents. This is not a blame game. This is not about I wanted to blame parents for these things. I wanted to support parents in understanding how they can best support their kid, how they can best understand the kid that seems difficult to understand, how the parent can take care of themselves so this is even possible. Because as much as I've noticed so many changes in our children because of COVID, I also know that as parents, we have been working overtime is an understatement, having to relearn, having to know what to do, and having to know how to be, having to not just for our own families, but for society as a whole. So we've been under a great deal of stress too. So the way I write and the focus on this book is really for you. So you can feel a sense of self. So you can feel a sense of belonging, because if you do, your kids will just learn it. You don't have to teach them. They'll just watch you. They'll just, learn from you. So I'm just going to stop for a second. Does anyone have any questions about that? Or an example that maybe doesn't? Oh, hold on, everybody virtual. Hold on, everybody, glasses coming on. There we go. Okay. So what I wanted to do, thank you. And I'll repeat it for everybody who's virtual, don't worry. We are friends. Yes. Yes. Yep. Mm. Yeah. Thank you. That's very nice. And also I agree. So my friend Evelyn just said that what was helpful to her is that she started focusing on these ideas around self-awareness, about communication, about self-expression, about talking to her kids, all of these things really early. And so as things kind of amped up as the kids got older, she felt like she already had these tools in place. So for people who are, I'll kind of give you both sides of this for what Evelyn said. for people who have young kids, because people often say when I'm doing a presentation or a class, they'll say, well, my kid's 2, are you going to be talking about 2-year-olds? And no, I may not be talking specifically about 2-year-olds, but the concepts we're talking about are universal. It doesn't matter how old your children are. It applies at every age. Todd and I were joking today that maybe we're going to do a Zen grandparenting podcast eventually, since our kids are getting older. It applies at every age. But I will also say, for those of you who have older kids, where some of the things we're talking about today or that you're considering, if you read the book, you may be like, oh God, I didn't think about any of these things. It's also never too late, because connection and communication with your kids never ends. Like, I am now old enough to have friends who have kids that are out of college or who are getting married or starting their own families. I'm aging myself so much, but they still have to maintain this relationship with their kids in a healthy way. They're your kids and your kids and your kids until forever. When they're, and on the flip side of that, these ideas that I'm referring to in the book and then we talked to on the show, they're not just about parenting. They're about talking with your parents or your in-laws or your partner. What's so nice about these concepts that we're going to be discussing is it applies in all relationships. So you don't have to, when people think about parenting as being this separate thing, like, I need to be the role of mom or the role of dad. How do I do that? No, I relate to other people this way. I talk to my friends this way, but how do I become a mom? You get to be yourself as a mom. You don't have to become a different person to be a mom. One of the best gifts you can give your children is to introduce them to you. Let them know who you are. What's your favorite color? What music do you listen to? Do you like to dance? Do you like to sing? Who are you? Do you like to read books? Do you like to take baths? Whatever interests you, they're interested. And then your interests either give them motivation to try some of your interests or to expand their awareness about their interests. So taking on the role of mom or the role of dad is never necessary. You can be a person who is mothering, parenting, but you get to be yourself in the process. And it's so freeing because then you don't have to change behaviors. How I just remember growing up and watching adults be one way with other adults. And then with kids, they were completely different, or they were shut down, or they didn't talk, or vice versa. Where with the kids, they'd be kind of mean or telling them what to do. And other people would show up and they'd be like, oh, hi, how are you? This inconsistent narrative of who they were. And again, I don't have that slide up anymore, but that is a sense of belonging too. That's like a first chakra, second chakra thing where you kind of don't know who to be, or third chakra, individuation, where you're I'm not sure who I am. I'm not sure how to act. I'm not sure who to be. And one of the great lessons, I hope, of this book is that you get to be yourself. But if you have learned a lot of other behaviors, if you have been taught other things, sometimes there's a big unlearning process. It's like this big onion we have to peel, which is ourselves. Where did I learn this? Why am I doing this? Why do I say these things to my kids? Why am I really pissed off right now? These moments of feeling angry or scared. I was just telling my friends before we started that I have realized that when my kids were young and they had struggles, that I did a really good job separating from their struggles. They would have a hard time, but I wouldn't feel triggered by it. I would just be able to talk to them about it and be like, yeah, that's hard or that's difficult. But I was able to maintain a sense of balance. As my girls have gotten older and I have more memories about what it's like to be their age, I'm struggling more with what they tell me. Not even because it's necessarily worse, but because I emotionally feel so attached to it. I remember those moments. I remember that hard time. I remember how that felt. I remember the fear. And so they tell me a story and I can't get myself, I have to learn to separate from it a little bit so I can be helpful to them. And so I'm not in there with them struggling with this problem or up at night thinking about how to solve their issue. It's not my life. And they need me to be supportive and someone they can go to. They don't need me to be afraid and scared and worried about what's going to happen to them. Because then where do they go when they feel that way? I wrote I do this thing called Zen Parenting Moment where I send out an essay every Friday. And the one that I did last week was, Todd and I talked about it on the show today, actually, because it was a perfect example of what we sometimes do with our kids, which is there was a teenage girl I was working with. She was lovely, but she was having a lot of challenges. And when she and I would talk, I would really, really try and inspire her to talk to her mom. Talk to your mom about these issues. Talk to your mom. So she emailed me one day and she said, okay, I did exactly what you said. I talked to my mom and she's so angry with me and she's so frustrated that she told me she doesn't trust me anymore. And so while as a parent, I understand the parental reaction of, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed by what you just told me. I'm scared. There's also a huge missed opportunity in there, which is your kid is scared. They made a mistake and they're coming to you. They are asking you to help them or help me talk this through or allow me to release this shame. And if we then say, go to your room, I'm not talking to you about this anymore. I'm so frustrated. I don't trust you. The possibility that they're going to come to you again when they're struggling is minimized. I'm not saying it won't happen, but it's decreased because they came to you because they already felt all those things. They already felt ashamed, scared, disappointed, frustrated. And they're saying to you, I made this mistake. What do I do? And if you're like, I can't even look at you, I'm so disappointed and give me your phone, then you're probably not going to be the person they go to when that happens again. Now, to be clear, it doesn't mean that you need to say, no big deal, it's fine. You need to hear, listen, ask questions, and there might even be a consequence. It might necessitate a consequence, but you don't have to do that first. That can be an hour later, the next morning, that evening. You can have that discussion about the consequence. And actually, a consequence makes a lot more sense to a kid if you have thought about it a little bit. When we're angry and we're throwing out consequences, like Todd always talks about how his parents would be like, you're grounded for a month. You're grounded for 6 months. What did they say? You're grounded till your birthday. It's a long time. That doesn't make any sense to them. And they know it doesn't make sense. And they know that you're reeling. And they also then are like, what does that mean? Like, what's that going to do? Versus, let's talk later tonight about, what's going to happen next. And then you come in with a thoughtful response. Maybe no consequence. Maybe it's, I'm just glad you told me and let's work through this together. Or maybe it's because you did this. This is something we're going to have to work on and we won't have this or this anymore, whatever it may be. But you kind of get my point that our ability to regulate our emotions impacts how we respond to our children. Yes. Do you have a microphone, Toddy? So his question is, what do you do if they don't want to talk about it? Do you mean right in that moment? Well, in these situations when your children, regardless of the age that they are, if it's something that needs to be discussed, like something that is like to talk through a mistake that they shared with you and they opened the conversation, then I would just say, what would be a good time? Do you want to wait till morning? Do you want to go to lunch? Kind of figure out and allow them to make a choice about what that time would be. Depending on their age, a lot of times they'll be like, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. And because we're the adults in the conversation, we're the adults, even if like I said, I have an 18-year-old, but she's an adult, but I'm still the parent in the relationship. So it is my job to continue to find creative ways to communicate with my children. It's not always going to happen the way that we want it to. Our lives are not movies. We can't, but I was actually, sorry, total pop culture tangent, but I was just listening to the Rewatchables and they were talking about the movie Kramer versus Kramer, which if any of you have seen it, it's a movie about divorce. And they were talking about all the challenges, that happened in the movie and how it kind of all got cleared up at the end. And then they were talking about that amazing moment when, the Dustin Hoffman character teaches his 7-year-old to ride a bike, and they have this amazing time. And then the kid goes off and he's riding a bike, and, it's just this amazing moment. And one of the guys who was hosting the podcast was like, yeah, I have a kid right now and I just can't wait for that moment. And I totally want to call them up and be like, it's not going to look like that. Have you guys taught your kids how to ride a bike? It's like painstaking, and they're like angry that you're helping. And then they're angry that you let go. And then they're angry, it's not a movie. And so whenever people like watch these kind of experiences and they're like, oh, I just can't wait, I want to be like, the amazing moments with our kids are the ordinary moments. They're not those moments, they could be, maybe you'll have a good story for me, but most of the time, those are really hard things that I would always ask Todd to be in charge of, because I was not a big fan of running behind the bike. But anyway, going back to the creativity, just to give you some examples, one of my children has a harder time expressing herself verbally, or she used to. So she and I used to write to each other. Okay. So that was a way she would write in a notebook. I would write back. Another one of my kids really likes pop culture the way I do. So I try to incorporate a lot of lessons and conversation about movies she's watching, and try to engage conversation about what she's experiencing in life and blend it into movies and TV shows. Okay. My youngest child needs a lot more. She's a physical touch person. She's a very quality time person. I cannot be distracted when I'm with her. Do not be distracted when you're with her, because that can shut down a conversation like that. You know what I mean? Do any of you have kids who are like, well, if you're not interested, that kind of thing, where you're like, whoa, I just had a quick call, but instead of deciding that they're being unfair, or that, you should be able to look at your phone when you want, you're an adult. You have to remember that everybody experiences people in a different way. And if what she's telling you, or he's telling you through their behavior, is, I need you to see me, and I get frustrated when you're not paying attention to me, then we do our best to pay attention. We listen to what they're telling us. And so in answering your question, Todd, there's we have to be creative. And maybe we do need to let go of this for a day or two. Maybe the tensions are so high when it comes to something that they told us, that they may still feel a lot of there's a few things that my daughter had written to us, and she was still living with us, but she wrote to us and told us, and she wanted a little space between the writing and the conversation. She was like, read that, integrate that, and then we'll talk about it a little later, which is fine. That's okay. And so we need to have patience and also creativity. Okay. So because I've been giving a lot of interviews about this book, and I've had to go through chapter by chapter, and I don't really want to do that or bore you, and we don't have time to do it. So I wanted to just pull out some of the most important ideas. And again, if you have any questions about them, I'll answer them, but I just wanted to at least focus on these things that I think are most important. And some of them we've already kind of touched on, which emotional regulation versus dysregulation. What I want to say about dysregulation is there are so many dysregulated adults right now. It's unbelievable. In our leadership, in school board meetings, when we're talking to teachers, we are so dysregulated. And I'm going to use we, because let's just be a collective right now so we all feel safe. We are approaching things with so much anger and so much unprocessed discomfort that we're dumping all over other adults. And our children are totally seeing this. Every school board meeting is online. Every big event that happens is in the paper. Our kids are watching us fall apart with other adults. So when I talk about these things, like our kids learn by watching how we live, this is a perfect example. We tell them to go to school and be respectful and speak to other people with dignity, and to give everybody a fair turn, to listen, to be thoughtful, be kind. We're always telling our kids to be kind. And yet, look at how sometimes our community manages things, or leadership, people we don't even know. And I'm not talking about just our community leadership. I'm talking like the highest echelons of political leadership. Look at what our kids watch. And so can we control other people? No. Gave that up a long time ago. But we can control, or at least choose, our choices. We can choose how we react. We can choose how, or let me be careful with those words. We can choose how we respond, because reaction is when we're having a feeling and we just come out with it. I'm angry, so F you. I'm angry, so I'm leaving. That's reaction. Response is someone makes me angry, or I feel angry because of somebody, and I take a breath and I choose what I'm going to say or not say, or I leave. So I'm making a choice of how I want to respond. That's regulation. Now, emotional regulation doesn't mean be happy and joyful all the time. It means that you allow yourself to have all your emotions. There's none of them that are bad. And I know some of you who are here have probably read Brene Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart, or at least you've heard about it. And the reason I'm so glad she wrote it, besides that, I read everything she writes, is because she talked about 87, I keep banging this on my mask, sorry, 87 different emotions that we have. And she narrowed that down from like 150. And the reason why she wanted to do that is because she did all this research prior to writing the book. And she was asking people, how many emotional experiences do you have? And her research showed that people really only talk about 3 emotional experiences that they can identify. That's not a lot. And if you can't identify what you're feeling, how do you manage what you're feeling? If you, like for example, the other day, I was walking the day that the kids didn't have school, I decided, okay, it's not snowing yet. I'm going to go take a walk, not realizing it's also very, very cold and there's a lot of ice. And I totally bit it really, 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 really hard, like flew up in the air. My coffee went up in the air and I fell really hard. And of course, there's a car behind me, somebody who knows me, who like pulls alongside, is like, are you okay? Right? I'm embarrassed. That's the emotion I'm having. Okay. I'm embarrassed. But it can be so easy. I love to kind of watch the process that I go through, because it's so easy for me to stand up and then I get angry that he was driving there at that time and that I had to be embarrassed. Why did he have to come down the street then? Why did he roll down his window and ask me if I was okay? Like, how dare he? Because he caused me to feel this way. So this is a very benign example that doesn't hurt anybody, but can't you guys see how that can happen? How my initial feeling was just embarrassment, but then all of a sudden I'm pissed off at the world. So this can happen with everything. It's like my college students tell me all the time, I'm like, how do you feel? Stressed, overwhelmed, stressed, overwhelmed. What does that mean? What is stressed and overwhelmed? And really, when I take one of them, put them in the hot seat and I'm like, let's talk about stress. What does this mean? I'm nervous. I'm scared. I'm disappointed I didn't get an internship. I'm afraid because I got an F and I don't know what to tell my parents. So overwhelm and stress are umbrella terms. But when we really get down to it and they figure out how they're feeling, then they know what to do, because they can identify how they're feeling and then they can do something. Sometimes it's just go home and take a bath and allow yourself to feel this way. But sometimes it's like, it's time to tell your parents, or it's time for you to change your major. But they're so lost in their stress that they're stuck. They're like deer in headlights. So emotional regulation just means understanding the feeling you're having. It doesn't mean you have to change it immediately, but you understand. And then you choose how you're going to react, or I keep mixing up these words, how you're going to respond. You choose instead of dumping how you feel on everybody else. Because what I'm seeing from a lot of adults is such dysregulation that whatever they're experiencing, if it be at home, at work, in the community, they are bringing it and throwing up on everybody else. And they may have a strong passion for something. That's fine. But are they really communicating in a way that people can hear them? It's not about having an opinion, and it's not about people not having freedom of speech. I'm for it all. But can you communicate in a way where people can hear you and not be afraid of you? And then after you communicate, can you listen to what other people have to say and have a respect for their experience? We are not all having the same experience when it comes to our children, our homes, our socioeconomic needs, our health, our desires for education. When we decide that because this is right for my kid, everyone else should be doing it, is very short-sighted. Everybody has different needs, but our opinion is valuable because what your opinion is or what your experience is should be heard, but it shouldn't be demanded or forced. It can just be considered as part of the equation. So you can understand why this is what we're telling our kids to do anyway, right? Be good listeners. And so we have to role model what that looks like. And when our kids are not seeing it, if it be in their school or on the news or in leadership, we need to talk about it with them instead of pretend it's not happening or just say, well, that guy's a jerk or that woman is horrible. What's happening here? How do you feel about this? This is how I feel about it. You know, and always, I try and always go to the place of I understand why people feel this way, because I do. I watch dysregulated people all the time and I get it. But it doesn't mean their behavior is okay, right? Isn't this what we tell our kids? You know, when our kids are biting for the first time or kicking or throwing things, we say it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to use our hands that way. It's the same thing as adults. It's okay to be angry. It's not okay to yell at people and to throw people under the bus and to be cruel. It's just not. It's like kind of a thing that, you know, I can't believe we're still debating at this point in time, but we are. So does anybody have a question about that, about emotional regulation versus dysregulation? Yeah, Mary. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. It's a great question. So Mary's question is, when you're feeling dysregulated, what are some tools you can use or a mantra you can have where you can make a choice rather than react? I think the thing I go to the most, and I kind of do it now kind of naturally, but I'll kind of break it down so you guys can choose between this, is I think about the self-compassion model that Kristen Neff used, which a lot of you already know, but Kristen Neff is a researcher who focused on self-compassion and why it's more effective than self-esteem. For those of you who know Brene Brown's work, she got all of her, self-compassion information from Kristen Neff's research. So what Kristen Neff found out was that self-compassion necessitates three things: mindfulness, which all that means is just stay here. And the example would be like your 5-year-old, is mean to a friend, and then you decide that when they're 20, they're not going to have any friends. Okay. We jump too far ahead where really all that's happening is right here. So mindfulness, stay right here. The second one is self-kindness. What would you say to a friend who is having this experience? What would you say to a friend who is experiencing this emotion? So the practice is talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend, which can be very difficult because we grew up on the self-esteem movement, which was be better than everybody else. So we're often very self-critical of like, if we're not doing it right, then we think shame will help us change our behavior, and it won't. In case you haven't heard this before, shame does not change anyone's behavior. It often exacerbates behavior, and it often can lead to a shutting down and a lot of internalized doubt and pain. So that's just a side note. The third one is common humanity, which common humanity just means recognize that the way you're feeling, Mary or anybody here, is typical. Everybody feels this way. Everybody has been here before. Everyone's been mad at their kid. Everyone's lost it in front of people. Everyone's fallen and bit it and thrown their coffee up in the air. I'm not the only one. This happens all the time. My best friend, her favorite thing is videos of people who are, like biting it. So I wish I would have had a video to send her. But my point is I'm not alone. So stay here, be kind to yourself, have a moment of, and literally, Mary, you can do the hand on your heart thing. Like you can literally be, yeah. Right. Totally. Totally. So she's talking about that in, if say you're at a restaurant, and I'm using a really like easy example, you're at a restaurant, you can't decide what to order. You don't know what to order. Put your hand on your heart and say, what do I want to eat? The answer usually comes very easily. And this is something we shared with our kids because, with anything, do you want to take this class or that class? Put your hand on your heart, take a breath. What do you want? And usually the answer comes out really fast. Usually. Sometimes if we put up a lot of blocks where we live in our head a lot, it can take a little bit to practice this. And then obviously, Mary, the easiest thing is just breathe, just breathe for a second so you don't react. And so you're kind to yourself. And so you realize that this too will pass. All emotions, if we allow them to kind of come up and we acknowledge that they're there, they will pass through. Something I do in my meditation area is I sometimes write down what I'm worried about in that moment, not just to get it out of my system, but so I look at it a week later and realize there was no need to worry about that. Like something I'm mad about, I'll write it down. And then a week later, I'm like, okay, that's resolved. Like what that teaches me is that things come and go. Things are waves. Next thing. So we kind of already discussed this a little bit, but I want to reiterate this point. At the beginning of my book, I decided to put a section in, it's like an introduction, about things that we need to consider before we start this process of the chakras, this self-awareness process. And I wrote that in actually a couple of summers ago during the racial justice, time in our country, when there were a lot of protests and a lot of things were coming up and a lot of things we needed to look at as a country and a lot of things we needed to consider in ourselves. And I realized that there's a lot of pieces of our own history, of our family's history, of our country's history, of whatever it may be, that we need to at least acknowledge if we are going to then truly understand ourselves. I didn't give any advice on do it this way, say this. I just gave examples of focusing on dignity of all people. I use Rosalind Wiseman's example of that respect and dignity are two different things. Respect is somebody who acts in a certain way or does certain things that you really admire and they earn a type of, their character earns kind of a relationship with you. That's respect. Dignity is just because we're all human beings. We should not be treated cruelly and we all deserve and belong to be here. You can dislike someone, disagree with someone, not want to invite someone over to dinner, whatever it may be. You don't have to like them, but they deserve to be treated with dignity. As a social worker, I talk to my social work students all the time about when you are a clinician or a social worker, you work not just with victims or survivors, but you work with perpetrators too. You work with everybody. You work with people who are in prison. You work with people who have committed horrible crimes because everybody deserves dignity. They may deserve consequences. They may be in prison the rest of their life. But our judicial system, and I know it doesn't always work out the way it should, but that's what it's based on. Everybody has the right to be heard. So these are things we, need to consider that if, when people argue this point with me, because my students always do, if we don't treat people with inherent dignity, then we get into dehumanization, which is going to cause a lot of problems, and it already has. Dehumanization is looking at people and believing they don't have a right to exist, that they don't deserve to live, that they don't deserve the same rights as you, that they are somehow a lesser person than you. And if we dehumanize people, groups, anybody, we then can treat them poorly. Because we are actually hardwired to treat everybody with compassion, and we are hardwired to connect with others and to help others. That's how human beings survive. But if we dehumanize people, then internally we feel justified in treating them poorly. And that becomes a problem, as we can already see. You can look at many aspects of our society and notice that. I'm just moving through because of time. So the other big piece of everything that's in this book, I talk about connection so much because Really, if someone asked me to narrow down what's the most important thing you want people to understand, and I can never really do it, but it really comes down to self-awareness, mindfulness, curiosity, staying open-minded, and connection. What is the most important thing with your kid, no matter what they're going through? Stay connected. What does that look like? Different every day. Sometimes staying connected means spending some time apart. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is not about be around them all the time and say, how are you? What can I do for you? Connection is not about managing them or being present every moment. It's about recognizing the importance of staying in relationship with your child, regardless their age. Unfortunately, because we've had a lot of other relationships before we had kids, sometimes we use kind of outdated, maybe unfortunate ways of relating to them. Maybe we had relationships that weren't great, and we used things like passive aggressiveness or cold shoulder or not talking to our partner. And then we use that with our kids. We use ways of like punishing them by using techniques that have worked in other relationships, or they never really worked, but we thought they did. That's disconnection. That's full on disconnection. That is, I'm not going to speak to you. I'm going to avoid you. You're not worth my time. I am going to, they're going to say, is anything wrong? And you're going to say, nope, 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 nope. That's disconnection. They may come to you and say, is anything wrong? And you can say, yeah, I'm really upset and I need some time. That's okay. That's not passive aggressive disconnection. This is how I feel, and I do need some time. That's okay. Because guess what? If you do that, then when you come to them when they're frustrated and you say, can we talk about it? They may say, you know what? I'm pretty angry and I need some time, because they learned how to do that from you. You see what I mean? Like this whole idea that we want to teach our kids to be kind. So we teach them to be kind by yelling at them and telling them, God, be kind. You understand that's completely paradoxical and doesn't work. They're not learning through our words. Okay. So connection, I just, put under there, connection works if we're self-aware. If we're not aware, and again, self-awareness is not something you have, it's something you practice every day. It's not a thing where it's like, that's a self-aware person. That's not a self-aware person. Self-awareness is a moment-to-moment practice. So you're going to have days where you feel super self-aware and some days where you feel not self-aware at all. I think I got one more. I think this might be it. Yeah. So last one, mindfulness and autopilot. Two very different things. As I already explained when I was talking about self-compassion, mindfulness is just the ability to be here now. That's all it is. You don't have to have a meditation practice if you don't want one, even though it can kind of help build the muscle. I recommend it and I write about it in my book. But if you're like, it's not for me, mindfulness is just paying attention to the present moment and doing what you need to do. Some of my favorite sayings are, I'm just going to do right now, just do the next right thing, just focus on this moment, because the truth is that's all you can do, you guys. You can't do yesterday. You can't take back what you said. I mean, you can apologize for it. And you can't do tomorrow, and you can't do next year, and you can't do 5th grade, and you can't do 12th grade before they're there. You can't do it. So you just do right now. Versus autopilot is when we're not conscious of what we're doing. We're completely lost in our worries. We're lost in our anxieties. We're lost in what could happen. We're lost in our past trauma, and we're just kind of reacting to everything. And I'm using that word correctly, reacting to everything very quickly and not considering how it affects us or our family. Mindfulness, in my final chapter, I talk a lot about devotion. And devotion is whatever practices you have in your life that are dedicated to helping you feel connected to yourself, connected to others, connected to something greater. Any devotional practices, journaling, meditation, walking, nature, conversations with other people, therapy, whatever. Devotion is up to you. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one way to do devotion. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one way to do any kind of meditation either. There's a million different ways to do it. But devotion is the practice of mindfulness. Numbing is when we don't want to look at anything, we don't want to think about anything, and we want to scroll through our phone and just react to what we're feeling. Go to bed. I don't care. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to, fall asleep in my chair and not complete anything, just numbing out. We all have days like that. That's okay. But if that is our day to day, which is just, I'm not thinking, like, I don't want to put you on the spot because you've already been here an hour, but how many of you remember driving here? Do you remember getting in the car and driving here? Some of you do, some of you don't. If you don't, you are on autopilot. And I don't mean you're numb. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but what I'm saying is we can go through a lot of our day and not recognize how we got there. I've driven 4 hours before and been like, I don't even remember anything I've passed. I've been in my head the whole time. Sometimes that's helpful, especially if we're bored, but there's also a piece of that is not mindful at all. Getting in, how many times have I gotten in the shower and I can't remember if I shampooed my hair? Yeah. I'm totally on autopilot. I don't know. I don't remember. And I try and work through it and I blame myself, but it's a wake-up call, right? Instead of being reactive and being angry or throwing, deciding that we're horrible, it's just a wake-up call. It's like, okay, now I'm going to focus. Fear is a wake-up call. Doubt is a wake-up call. Anything that challenges us wakes us up to the moment. It actually helps us with mindfulness. Joy is a wake-up call. You guys know that I'm sure you've heard this before, but that joy is the most difficult feeling for people to feel, which is always amazing to me, because as soon as we feel joy, we get scared we're going to lose it. So we oftentimes don't want to feel it at all because we're like, I can't deal with the disappointment of not having it. So I'd rather just stay status quo and not have it. The antidote to that is gratitude. If you're having a moment and you're enjoying it, just say to yourself internally or externally, I'm grateful. And it helps you remember that joy. That's really the best tip I can give for that. So it is 8 o'clock. I'm going to stop talking. For those of you who are listening virtually, hello. Zen Parenting, the book is available. Zen Parenting, the audiobook is available, which I read myself. The Kindle is available. It's everywhere. For those of you who are here, I actually have books here if you want one. And otherwise, I will do any questions that anybody has. Yes. 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 It's
are those three universal or?
Good question. They're universal. They're universal. They're anger, sadness, and what was the third one, Todd? Fear. So those are the ones that people identify that they're having. I feel like there's one that's more optimistic though. Do you guys remember? I know anger and sadness are two of them, but they are universal. So it's not like people are coming up and saying, here's my 3 and here's my different 3. Those through the research were the ones that appeared most often, those 3. And that if, the best way to look at that is if somebody can only identify those 3 emotions, imagine how many experiences they have during the day that they don't really understand what they're going through. If you don't have words to describe your experience, then you don't even know how to describe your experience. You're just either pissed off or sad, and that's not a good range. And so obviously for ourselves as parents, we need to understand, have some diversity of emotions or emotional words. And actually one thing that I can share with you, there is an app and it's called Mood Meter. And I think it was created by Mark Brackett, who wrote Permission to Feel. And is it free? It's $1. And we've actually been having fun with it because not only does it help you kind of track your mood during the day, but it gives you new words to describe what you're feeling. And then my favorite part is it'll say, do you want to shift? And if you say yes, then it gives you ideas of what to do. And if you don't, then it just records it. And then you can look back and be like, oh, in the beginning of the day, I kind of feel this way. At the end of the day, I feel this way. So it's just there are ways we can practice this. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Sure, sure, sure. I will. So as you can see, the graphic, the blocks are the colors of the chakras, and they are purposefully not perfectly aligned because we're never like that. You know, we're always kind of like, oh, teetering this way and then teetering that way. We are never in perfect alignment. We're always working on something. Like, do you guys ever get to a point where this is what I complain about to Todd all the time with the kids. Like, we have 3 kids. And so I'll be like, these 2 are doing great. And this one's struggling. And then this one's doing great. And yes, right. So it's always a little teetery. And the acceptance of that is kind of nice. You know, like instead of thinking everything's supposed to be fine all the time, we have to kind of have some humor about, well, at least this one's okay. Now I'll manage this. Okay. We got to kind of roll with it. So just to kind of like, so that's kind of where it came from. That's why I did the blocks and they're the colors of the chakras. But just to kind of really quickly go through these without going too deep, the root chakra, it's your sacrum, it's your grounding, it's your sense of connection to the earth, which is why it's related to belonging. Because if you feel grounded in the earth, just think about like a tree. You know, you have to have roots to do everything else. In yoga, we have something called root to rise, where you cannot rise until you first spread out your toes, you feel rooted to the earth. And then the second chakra, by Evelyn, the second chakra, which is located right here, is where it's obviously where our sexual organs are. So that is like a pleasure center. It's also where we connect to our emotional experience. It's also where we connect to our creativity. And again, that makes sense, right? This is where the womb is, you know, the most creative act we ever do. So that, you know, that's where that's located. Your third chakra is in the stomach region. Or solar plexus is what we always say. This is your individuation. This is how you, like, you know, when people talk about gut instincts, you feel it here in your stomach. And a lot of kids, when they're having a lot of feelings, they will, if they don't understand what they're feeling, they'll just say, my stomach hurts, because this is their sense of self, you know? And so then we go through the whole rigmarole of taking them to the doctor and there's nothing wrong. And it's just because they're having all sorts of feelings. Okay. And if they understand that this is their sense of self right here, they start to learn to trust what they feel. This is who you are. It's why, like, one of my teachers was like, don't get a navel piercing. You don't want to pierce that area. If you have, it's okay. It was just, I remember she was like, this is like a sacred area. So an individuation, just so I can be clear about that, means becoming your own person beyond your family. Your children are not supposed to be you. They're not supposed to be like you. They might have some similarities, but they're supposed to be themselves. And children need to individuate. They start around 2 or 3, then they continue it around 13. You know, 2 or 3 is when they're like, I do it myself. I do it myself. They're learning that they're separate from you. Their teenage years, they start to be more vocal. I literally don't want you around. I will literally do this myself. So individuation is an important part of the third chakra. And the fourth chakra is the heart. It's your heart center, to be loved, to be open-hearted, to also receive love, to give love. For some of my friends here have been to my house. My outside of my house is green. The inside of my house is green. Everything I do is green because of the heart chakra, because it's a green color. I love, it's like a very warm color to me. The throat chakra, it's probably the most interesting one, I think, because it's the bottleneck of our body. If we are not clear about our alignment, you know, our first 4 chakras, then it's very difficult to speak what we believe and feel. Our throat chakra can get really congested. If everything else feels clear, you know who you are, you feel connected, you're, you know, using your creativity, you know you belong, it is easy to say what you need to say. But it can be difficult if you don't. And then third eye center, probably our most spiritual center. That's where our intuition, our sense of mindfulness, our sense of connection to ourselves, and our imagination, which we should have our whole lives, not just when we're young. And then our 7th chakra, top of our head. This is our connection to everything, our interconnection to others. You know, if we learned anything in COVID, it's that borders don't matter, guys. You know, if something happens across the world, it can happen here. Like, we're interconnected to other people and also interconnected to something that may be grander, you know, our own sense of universe or God. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I appreciate you letting me go through that process. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Like, and it's just so funny because if you look at the blocks, like if I had them straight up and down, you'd be like, bullshit. Like, yeah, right. Like nobody's aligned like that. We'd love to be. Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I loved that was the first design they gave me and I loved it. I was like, that's exactly it. Simple and everything is spoken. Anything else? Oh, you're welcome. I had a joyful time writing this book and I mean it. I love writing. I hope to write another one soon. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. If you're virtual, you can find the book everywhere, bookstores, also, Amazon, indie books, all these places. And everything that Todd and I do is at ZenParentingRadio.com. So anything else you're interested in, you could go there. Okay, Jess.
All right, for those of you online, I did put the link in the chat so you can visit the website and order the book. If you're here in person, we have some in the back, and I believe you'll be signing as well. Yes.
Absolutely. You know what I didn't bring? I didn't bring any Sharpies.
Oh, I've got one. We also have snacks in the back, so please help yourself. And thank you all for coming.